every single client I've worked with, and I'm yet to be proven wrong, that you're already credible. There's no question about it. If you've got a result for just one client, you're already credible. You're an expert in your field. You understand how to get transformation for your clients.
Welcome back to the Master Your Business podcast. I'm your host, Deirdre Martin, and I am so excited to share this episode with you today. I am chatting to the self-proclaimed queen of thought leadership publicity. And you know what? I couldn't agree more. Claire Mason works with CEOs, founders, and business professionals to translate their vision into globally recognized thought leadership so they can establish credibility and expertise in the market, reach new audiences, and build a momentum of professional opportunities. So join us. Listen in as we dive into all things publicity related and how you can get your business featured in publications and podcasts to grow your revenue. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who you know is going to benefit from hearing Claire's brilliant tips and advice. Right, let's get started. Claire, it's absolutely marvelous to have you on the Master Your Business show with Deirdre Martin. I'm so happy to have you here. So, Claire, before we dive into all things publicity and getting featured and all of those things, tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, good morning, Deirdre. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to be on your podcast. I'm very honored to be here and to be asked to be here. And then secondly, I'm delighted to give you an introduction. My name is Claire Mason. I'm a thought leadership publicist. And what that means is I take founders, solo entrepreneurs, and coaches from world's best kept secret to thought leader. And I do that using my proven LinkedIn and media strategies.
LinkedIn for me is where most of my clients have come from, but oh my gosh, I'm not getting featured on anything on LinkedIn right now. What am I missing out on here, Claire?
Well, LinkedIn at the moment, it's the gold rush time to be on LinkedIn. So the fact that you're on LinkedIn in the first place is a big win in your favor. And then LinkedIn themselves, it was late Q3 last year, came out saying that there were 740 million people on their platform, and only 3% were actually publishing content. And that 3% was only publishing content once a week. So already, I'm not talking about, publishing trash and doing it more often and then you're going to win. Of course, you need to be strategic about the content that you're publishing. But already, if you're publishing content 2 or 3 or even more times per week, then you're really putting yourself in a very rare category of one, because most people aren't using the platform the way it needs to be used. And then it was probably only about 2 weeks ago, I was on a LinkedIn webinar that was hosted and run by LinkedIn themselves, and some very, very senior LinkedIn executives were saying on the webinar that LinkedIn at the moment is a content deficient platform. There is actually more of a demand for content on LinkedIn than what the platform actually has to serve. So if I was working with you, the first thing I would do is take a look at your content calendar and to see what your content cadence is. How frequently are you posting? Because that's how you teach the algorithm to serve your content and get you in front of the audience you want to be in front of.
That's so interesting. And I guess what you're saying there as well is, are we talking quality here or quantity?
I'm actually going to say to you, we're speaking both, and I'm a person who hates sitting on the fence. So normally I'm somebody who always will, make a choice and nail her colors to the mast. But when it comes to LinkedIn, as well as media work, so the publicity that I do, I mean, the term public relations is very expansive, and it includes more than media work. The work that I do is very exclusively media work. So that when people hire me as a publicist, my job is to get them into publications and podcasts and TV segments and YouTube lives and all the things like that. It's to grow their profile. But you really are talking about quality always, and you're talking about quantity. And to forget the quantity piece, you're really tying one arm behind your back. You need to be out there frequently. I'm not saying to anyone, I mean, I run a business too, and you need time to go walk in the forest and have a nice cup of tea and look after yourself. I'm not telling anybody that we need to become slaves to the algorithm, but I am saying to people that posting posting one piece of content every few months or every few weeks is not going to move the needle for you, even if that piece of content goes viral. And it's highly unlikely that it will, because the algorithm is built in such a way that it will reward you the more frequently you post. So you need to be, I always recommend at a minimum 3 times a week. And when it comes to publishing on LinkedIn, and then in terms of my own life, my own professional life, I seek to meet that 3 times a week cadence at least 80% of the time. And, then I give myself because life happens, we get deadlines, we get big projects, and we need to service our clients, or maybe we need to go make a dentist appointment, whatever happens. But it's just 3 times a week, 80% of the time is kind of like the minimum place to start. And if you can do more than that, and there are lots of pieces of software out there that can really help you to automate a large part of the task, which can make it easier. You don't need to envision, knowing that LinkedIn has a lot to offer you, and you could really treat it as an incredible lead pipeline or prospect pipeline, but then you feel you've got to spend 24 hours a day over your laptop keyboard a slave to LinkedIn. That's not necessary.
So we're talking a lot about LinkedIn, but Claire, you're a publicist. You don't just help people with LinkedIn and social media. I'm sure there's lots of traditional media and things like that that you're working with. So tell people who maybe don't know, what is a publicist and what exactly are the benefits of using a publicist to grow awareness and reach and whatnot?
Well, there are a few benefits. So, firstly, when I work off of a framework called Get Credible, Get Visible, and Grow, and it's my own proprietary framework. And the reason why I've created it that way is because publicity can seem like this. Firstly, let's call a spade a spade. The term publicity doesn't come without, some shady connotations. So, publicity can sound a little bit, maybe not the way you want to grow your business profile, but B2B communications is a very different thing. So, firstly, when it comes down to your credibility, I always say to every single client I've worked with, and I'm yet to be proven wrong, that you're already credible. There's no question about it. If you've got a result for just one client, you're already credible. You're an expert in your field. You understand how to get transformation for your clients. Most of the time when I start speaking to the people who approach me, it turns out they've got their own proprietary frameworks or insights or ways of doing things. So you're already credible, but chances are not a big enough audience knows about that. And one of the things that I'm always saying is the second best thing that you can do in your business is get in front of your audience. The very best thing you can do in your business is get in front of someone else's audience. And of course, when it comes to publishers, those are the biggest audiences on the planet. Even if we can talk about trade and niche B2B media. So, for example, if I'm working with an accountant, I might seek out the Accountancy Monthly magazine, for example. That's a core piece of media. I'm not saying that they've got the same readership figures as the New York Times, for example, but I am saying that they've got a readership that you need to be in front of, and it's probably bigger than your audience. So the benefit of working with what we call traditional media, although I will say to you, the idea of traditional and online media, that boundary is blurring a lot. It really is media at this point, and modern day publicity or modern day public relations is as much you posting on social media profiles, joining in for Facebook Lives, being included in newsletters as what it is, and being on podcasts as what it is being in, an op-ed in the New York Times, for example. But one of the great benefits is that if you have been featured in, let's say, Accountancy Monthly or Business Insider, New York Times, whatever, I'm trying to explain how you can start with very trade, B2B centric niche media and then go all the way to very mainstream titles. You're immediately positioning yourself in your potential clients' minds as someone credible, because you've got a third party who is saying this individual's thoughts, opinions, forecasting of the industry, whatever the case might be, is relevant. And it's a little quip that I say, not to be sarcastic, but I hope it shows the point. I always say, saying you've been featured in blah blah trade publication or blah blah mainstream title immediately puts you in a different position to saying you've been featured in your own news feed, if you get what I mean on that. Even with LinkedIn, and I'm a total LinkedIn fangirl, and I also, drive a lot of leads and clients my way. But from LinkedIn, so I really do rate the platform very highly. But again, it's me saying things about myself on LinkedIn, whereas the moment I'm published somewhere else or I'm on a podcast somewhere else, it's someone else saying nice things about me. And that's the benefit of working with a publicist.
Fantastic. And yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, and I'm totally convinced, right? 100% convinced. So let's say now, here's me in my business. My business is fairly established at this point. I have regular, loyal clients. I have a good enough following on social media. So that's with what I publish myself. And I do get invited to feature on other people's podcasts from time to time. And I'm guessing a lot of the listeners who are established coaches, entrepreneurs, and small business owners are probably in the same boat. But if it's something they want to initiate, where do they even start with, reaching out to one of those publications or the top podcast under business or a top podcast under coaching? Let's say if Tony Robbins, for example, has a podcast, which he does, and somebody is a coach and they want to get featured being interviewed in Tony Robbins' podcast, how would they even start to get the ball rolling on that?
So, firstly, I would say to you, again, we need to think about quantity and quality here. So, if, just taking your example that you've provided, if you want to get onto Tony Robbins' podcast, absolutely hold that goal in mind. And there's no reason why you shouldn't be on Tony Robbins' podcast. But don't put all of your eggs into that one podcast basket. So the starting point is really to build a media list. And the way you do that, there are loads and loads of media databases out there that you can buy a subscription to. I take a particular pride in the media databases that I build for clients, because obviously, being a publicist, I do have subscriptions to these media databases. They are the tools of my trade, but I don't go to them. And for example, if I'm working with a cybersecurity client, just enter the keyword cybersecurity, press a button, a media list sort of gets spat out at me, and then I say, oh, I've built the media list, and here's the invoice for doing that work. I actually go and really research the editors and the journalists that are covering the stories to make sure that I am pitching to the right journalist and editor. So, for example, just in the space of cybersecurity, you might get 300 names of media professionals who are covering these stories, but one of those people might be covering it purely from the perspective of government policy, for example. So if you're pitching a 5 ways to make your business more cyber secure, and you pitch it to that editor, you're never ever going to hear back. So that's why I invest a lot of time following journalists and editors on Twitter. I go and research the articles they've written. I read up about them. I read them, and I get an idea of what their angle is and how they cover stories. But if you were doing this for yourself, as I say, either you can pay a subscription fee to get access to a media database, or you could also go onto Twitter. Twitter is a really, really very rich network, well, very rich social network for journalists and editors and podcast hosts and all types of media professionals. And many of them actually include their email address in their bio. So it takes time. I mean, it's a time resource that you're going to have to allocate, but of course that is free. You don't have to pay for a subscription. And then on the other hand, you've got access to communicate with these people very quickly. Whether they answer you or not is obviously their prerogative, but you would be able to send them DMs and tweet with them quickly. And then from the point of, once you've got the media list, the very next step is to start identifying what your core messages are. And when I work with people, I always say, you've got 3 core messages, and then we say those we keep reiterating those and saying them in 1,000 different ways. So, for example, my whole framework about get credible, get visible, and grow, those are my 3 core messages. But then there are many, many ways that I can share stories about credibility, about visibility, and about growth through LinkedIn and PR.
That makes complete sense. And you make it sound so easy, Claire, but I'm really guessing it's not. And, one of the things for me was, how do I, where do I even start, right? So you've answered a lot of that, but My business now has been established 15 or 16 months. I have featured in a couple of things, but it's not because I've reached out to seek to be featured. It's because people have reached out to me. So, what is the best way to reach out to people? And, as I say, I'm 15 months, 16 months right now as we're recording this show. That's how long my business has been established. But when should I have started? Should I have started before now? Or, if somebody's in business 10 years, how regularly should they be reaching out?
Well, I don't subscribe to any idea that there's a right or a wrong time, or if you do it now, you've kind of missed the boat. You've got to catch up on all the rest. I wouldn't agree with that at all. Is it okay if I just go back to your earlier point about I make it sound so easy, but actually it's probably not, and then I'll address the question you've just asked, because one of my absolute missions in life is to demystify working with the media. So I'm here to say it actually isn't it actually isn't difficult, okay? And I'm not looking to talk myself out of a business here. Where the creativity and where the intellectual gymnastics, let's say, comes in is working out the angles and the hooks and becoming very fluent with the media. And I would like to say at this point I believe I am there because I do this every day and I've done it for a long time because I absolutely love what I do. But for anybody who is eager to begin working with the media and possibly does want to do it themselves, doesn't want to, either can't commit to a monthly retainer with a publicist or just actually would really prefer to do it themselves, the world of the media is absolutely available to them. I would always suggest that you invest in some training, but there is a lot of that online. Publicists like me offer that training often. You can find a lot of that information on YouTube and in other places too. So I'm really here when I do my training with people, I always start off with a media mindset module before we get to anything like a media list and how to talk to a journalist on Twitter. And this is how you amplify on LinkedIn. And here's an idea of a pitch, for example, because the only thing you have to really internalize is that the media wants to hear from you. And by you putting yourself out there with your stories and your way of doing things for your clients, you're actually involved in an act of service. So this is, you're not going to send an email to a journalist and birds are going to fall out of the sky because you've done it wrong. You're actually doing a really good thing by making yourself more visible. So that's what I want to say about the fact that there is a proven framework of how you work with the media and anybody can learn how to do it. And then the second piece in terms of, is it a little bit too late or are you playing catch up? No, not at all. I believe I've been in business for 6 years and I write some columns for different B2B publications, but I'm just about to embark because my growth strategy and my business strategy has changed. I'm just about to embark on a publicity campaign for myself. So that'll probably kick in if we're now in the middle of July. I'd say it's probably around about the end of August, beginning of September that I'll be embarking in that. So the best way to get your thought leadership PR campaign to pay dividends for you is to make sure that it's 100% aligned with your business strategy, and also to make sure that you are willing to commit to it on a consistent basis. So again, just to use my old faithful example of the New York Times, for example, let's say we got you onto the front page of the New York Times tomorrow and then nothing for 12 months. It's not really going to move the needle for you. So the best time to invest in a thought leadership publicity campaign or any kind of PR is when you're willing to commit to it, for a minimum of 6 months, and really it should become part of your ongoing marketing. And then, Deirdre, we really get into the point where it's not about being on the front cover of the New York Times or in Business Insider or Accountancy Island or the Business Post, whatever the case might be. It's really about how you amplify that media coverage afterwards. So if you remember, there was this saying, I might have it a little bit incorrect, but I think for the most part I'll have it down, that today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish paper. Do you remember that saying, from fish wrapping paper or something like that? That's before we had online publications. Okay, so obviously, we can't wrap our fish and chips in an online link for an article, but exactly the same concept. If you're going onto the Business Post or Irish Times or whatever publications you might be reading today, you're not sitting there thinking, oh, I wonder what they published, 3 weeks ago or 2 months ago, whatever the case might be. So the real goal is to have the real power is to have a whole amplification strategy after you've been published. And that's things like sharing on your social media profiles, repurposing the content as a blog post on your own blog, sharing it in your newsletters. Maybe in an article, you can take out 4 points and make branded images about that. Maybe you can turn a piece of your media coverage or your podcast appearance into a webinar. You need to be repurposing the content to really get the best bang for your buck for investing in a thought leadership publicity campaign in the first place.
That makes sense, because by repurposing it, what you're doing is you're reiterating your message, as you said already, in about 1,000 different ways, right? So it helps to stress and emphasize that point. And okay, so maybe I don't want to be on the New York Times, but I want to be on the cover of Forbes magazine, Claire, as the song goes, sitting next to Oprah and the Queen, right? And so if it's a case that in my industries, and you said, okay, so there are subscriptions that you can subscribe to, and you can start to get to know the types of publications that you can feature in. Are they typically all online publications, or are they traditional media types of publications? Because I've read recently that the newspaper market is declining 25% year on year in terms of readership. So how does somebody know that it's a good publication to feature in, or that it's going to be worth their while going to the effort to create a thought leadership piece and submit it?
Okay, so again, we've got to think here in terms of quantity and the fact that we're looking at a concept that's very similar to compound interest. Okay, I'm not advocating to anyone to waste your time and just be writing blog posts and getting them published and it doesn't move the needle for you. But if I was looking to get somebody onto the front cover of Forbes magazine or into the Tony Robbins as a guest on the Tony Robbins podcast, for example, what I always do is, as part of my framework, I talk about your media skyrocket and how you build. Each time you take that step further and you build that way. So I'm not saying that you got to spend 100 opportunities being in really small B2B publications before you make the leap to Forbes. But it does help, because what you're looking to do, you always need to keep in mind that when you're pitching yourself to an editor or a journalist, what you're actually doing is you're doing outbound sales. You're trying to you're completely cold in this person's inbox. So it's very helpful if you can say, and I've just been featured on this podcast, and you drop a link, or I've been featured in this publication. I think it was earlier this year, I had a client who had no publicity ever, and we went from a trade publication to Business Insider in 4 steps. So it can happen very quickly, but it was one of the strategies that I often employ for many of my clients, is to start with the trade publications, get that link, and often those publications are easier to get into. Get that link, and then you can just keep using that as your skyrocket to get to bigger and bigger pieces of media. I'll also share something else with you, is that often, especially in the B2B world, often your clients are the ones that'll come through the B2B publications that have smaller readerships and are far more niche. So I have a great example there with an Irish company, a software company, SaaS company, and I got them into a publication they were in the fintech space, and I got them into a publication that was, it was a B2B publication with about 60,000 monthly readers. And then it also had a firewall. So when you clicked on the link, you couldn't just access the article that we had published. You saw our name and all the rest, but you had to pay if you wanted the article. And we had, we had a big back end with Salesforce CRM and all the rest. But from that article, we got 60 leads in the pipeline. And the very same week, an article landed in CNBC. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that big US media house. That's a big, it's like a mainstream media. I think they've got something like 60 million readers, and we got 5 leads. So, and that doesn't mean the CNBC piece wasn't valuable either. You need to look at your whole publicity campaign as an ecosystem. It was great to have the CNBC logo on the website. It was another piece of content to share with our newsletter subscriber base and all the rest. But in terms of where the clients can often come from, it can be those B2B publications that are very niche. They're very focused on what they're talking about. And yeah, they absolutely should be part of the ecosystem that you're focusing on.
Again, Claire, you make complete sense. Publicity to me seems like a foreign thing. You articulate it so well, which makes things really, really helpful. And I'm sure that listeners will feel exactly the same way. If you were to give me 3 to 5 actionable and practical steps that listeners can take away and use to start to grow their publicity and to start to build that ecosystem, what would those 3 to 5 steps be?
The first one I'm going to say is that your social media presence definitely will open the doors for you to media opportunities. Again, I want to qualify that. I'm not saying you need to be on each and every single social media platform that is out there. But if you are on a social media platform, and I have to say you should be if you want to be moving into the space of publicity, make sure you're active on it. There is an article, if you search for The Rise of the Influencer CEO, that's the title of the article, The Rise of the Influencer CEO. It's a brilliant kind of deep dive thought leadership piece into how the media is looking at social media profiles. Again, we're looking to convince the editor or the journalist or the podcast host and producer that we're speaking to that we're a credible source for us to be putting in front of their audience. So when you're not going to pitch an editor with a really, really poor story or a story that doesn't align with their audience at all, but you've got a great TikTok profile or you've got a great LinkedIn profile and they're going to grab you. They're not going to do that at all. But if they are looking at your pitch and they're interested in you, they are going to go and check you out on social media to make sure that you're not somebody who last posted 4 years ago and now you're putting yourself in front of the media. So the first thing to do is, make sure you're giving yourself the best chance of success that you can, and that comes through your social media piece. So that's the first tip. The second tip I would say is there are loads and loads of resources online, or get in touch with somebody like me who can help you understand the structure of a pitch, because that's the piece that I'm saying to you, everybody can learn it. You don't want to get into an editor or journalist's inbox and be annoying and have very long pitches. And trust me, I learned how to do this. So, I used to write pitches that were the length of War and Peace. I've learned to be succinct over the years, and there's a specific framework to follow. So that's what I would say. Invest in some learning. If you have the finances to spare, I would say that learning will be absolutely accelerated by working with a publicist who can train you. If you don't have the finances to spare, but you do have the time to spare, all of this information is available online. And then my third tip would be actually get over yourself and start pitching, because I don't say that to be harsh and uncaring. I know it can be nerve-wracking, but I promise you, once you've done it once, the second time gets easier, and the third time, and by the time you've pitched 5 times, you're an old hand at this. You actually do need to get into editors and journalists' inboxes to let yourself be known. And then I'll give you just a little housekeeping tip. If ever when you pitch, you're not always going to hear back, okay? Because they're busy. It's not an indication that you got the pitch wrong or your story is terrible or you haven't got anything valuable to say to the media. That's not the truth at all. It's just often that, they are very busy. And I think you could do a search for 2 seconds online and you'll get statistics of how editors get 400 emails a day and this kind of stuff. So that's another reason why the quantity piece is so important, because you need to have a few ideas in play at any given time. But I will say to you, it is etiquette to follow up only once. And if you don't get a response by the time you've done your initial pitch and your follow up, then take that story and go to another editor. So move quickly and do a follow-up once. But that doesn't mean you can't go back to that editor with a new idea and a new story in 2 weeks' time, for example. And that's how you start building your own relationships with the media.
Claire, that's fantastic. And I'm going to get the link of The Rise of the Influencer CEO that you mentioned, and I will share that in the show notes afterwards. Okay, so let me summarize what you've said as the 3 to 5 actionable steps. So social media, number one, show up strategically on social media. And again, you don't need to be everywhere, but you need to be in the right places for your audience and consistently, right? So 4 years ago was too far. Number two was learning how to pitch. So there is a way to do it where you will be more likely to be successful. And you're not going to waste time if you hire a publicist, because they're going to guide you. So I'm all about the guides, Claire. I think it's important that we all have experts and guides that we refer to for help and support. So hiring a publicist will be money well spent. It will save you a massive amount of time, and they will either do it for you or they will guide you as to how to do it yourself, right? And then number 3 is get out of your own way. You are an expert. As Claire said earlier on in the show, if you've done something once, if you've gotten results for a client, if you've got a proven framework or blueprint that works for you, you are an expert. Start pitching. Get out of your own way. I love it. And number 4 was etiquette. Remember, these people get roughly 400 plus emails a day, and if you're going to follow up and pester them, they are likely not going to feature you because they see you as the pest, right? So follow up just once is sufficient, more than sufficient. Claire, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I do have just 2 suggestions to add. They're 2 they software tools that could be helpful. So the first one's called Haro, Haro, and that stands for Help a Reporter Out. And then the other one's Response Source. That's the name of it. Response Source, I think, is British and Haro is UK, but they, international in terms of their reach with journalists. So these are platforms where the media themselves are putting out the kind of sources they're looking to speak to and what kind of stories they're working on. And those are very helpful to get yourself on their mailing list, basically, and they'll send those to you.
I'm going to include the links to those in the show notes as well. Lastly, you mentioned you've got some things coming up that you're going to be creating some publicity about in your own business. Tell us a little bit more about what is happening in Claire Mason's world.
Thank you, Deirdre, for asking. So yes, I've been working in this space for a long time, and as I mentioned, I absolutely love it. I always say to people, I've only got one topic of conversation at a dinner party, and that's thought leadership. So maybe you don't want to sit next to me at a dinner party, but it's time for me to grow my visibility now, actually. So I'm in a lot of networking groups. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I do write columns for some B2B publications that I've spoken about. I really, really enjoy every aspect of working with the media and working with clients. However, the time has come for me to become more visible. So I am part of many different networking groups, and one of the unexpected, but I suppose better outcomes of COVID is that we're no longer restricted to networking groups in our own location, let's say. So I'm part of networking groups from around the world now. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I do write columns for 3 or 4 different B2B publications. So I've worked consistently on my own, growing my own profile over the years. However, the time has come for me to really ramp that up. And that's why I was saying earlier, there's no wrong or right time for you to embark on publicity and thought leadership. It's really where you are in your business. And the time has now come for me to be a lot more visible. So that is what is coming up. As I say, there is some stuff being prepared in the back end. So it's probably end of August, early September when hopefully my name will be in the headlines for all the right reasons, not the wrong reasons. And yeah, then I'm going to, see what opportunities unfold for me by being more visible and putting myself out there more. I do this for clients, and now I'm doing it for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a little bit like the cobbler with no shoes. We all tend to be a little bit like that from time to time. And Claire, I have to say, it's been fabulous chatting to you today. Thank you so much for joining me on the Master Your Business show with Deirdre Martin. And I look forward to connecting with you further. I'm going to share Claire's details in the show notes so anybody can check out her website, follow her on social media, and get in touch with her if they want some help with publicity in their business, be it done for you, done with you, or whatnot. You can get in touch with Claire on her website, and the details are in the show notes. Claire, thank you again.
Thank you, Deirdre. Thank you very much.